And now we invite Jerome to the microphone.
Thank you for inviting me here to speak to you today. I am Jerome Krakowiak, and I have served 2 years in the Peace Corps. It's a total time of 27 months where I was teaching math in Tanzania. It was very meaningful, and I loved the teaching math, and I would love to show you the math that I taught today, but from my experiences, not everybody has the same feeling toward math as I do. Consequently, today I will be focusing on the people and my students in my region. So we will not be seeing many pictures of animals or anything like that. We will look at the people and we'll talk about how they were alike. They looked different, but in reality, they were not. They were the kindest, most generous, sensitive people that I think I've ever encountered. It's interesting, we had at the beginning of the opening, the reading Thirsty, and it was really fascinating because it talks about thirsty for connection to ourselves. Well, I did not find that in Peace Corps. I still don't know where I am or where I'm going. That's to be discovered some other time. But thirsty for a connection to others, that was really meaningful. I have some fascinating, I think, very personal and fascinating stories that I can tell you. And just briefly, I'll just mention one before I start the slideshow. And I was sitting on a bus. And on a bus, there's not a whole lot to do except look out the window. So we were at the bus stop, and there was another bus to the side. And there was a lady looking out the window. She was looking in one direction, and I was looking at her. And sooner she turned around, and our eyes met. And we shared the biggest smile, and it's incredible. I cannot explain how we felt so connected. It's like our souls, our beings, something just touched, that complete trust. And that was something I think that was shared a lot between myself and especially the older people in Tanzania. Just fascinating. And then lastly, like the connection for a larger life. You really get to see the world. I've lived in different countries before, but this was the first time I had lived in a third world country where poverty was extreme. And we really get to see life at a larger picture, really as the whole. And being poor did not diminish these people a bit. They were happy, they were vibrant. We will see that some of the things that they did, their clothing, like I am wearing today, the shirt, and this is a wrap that the women would typically wear, very colorful, very spirited, very happy. So I hope that you ask any questions that you have, and I will go through and I'll be talking about mostly my region and my school and my students. So in Tanzania, the language the official country language is Kiswahili. Kiswahili or Swahili is basically the official language of about 7 countries in East Africa. There are many ways to say hello. So one of the most common that I used, because it was short, was habari. So habari means like any news. And then you would say nzuri, that would be good news. So I'll go habari, nzuri. Yeah, you speak Kiswahili better than I do for sure. And so I'll be talking about Lushoto. Lushoto was a small town. It was actually a town that was much bigger than a village. Towns typically will have banks associated with them. And to start with, I had a pointer, but I forgot it today. We can see I was on basically the other side of the world. So my journey home, when I came home, took about 24 hours of travel time. So, and that was like one of the quicker flights. I could have gotten a more expensive flight, and it would have taken about 20 hours. Typical flights were about 30. And we can see it is just a few degrees below the equator. So I was about 4 degrees below the equator, living in the mountains. The temperature was always like Indian summer. And up here to the top, we can see that like little circle, that donut shape. That's actually Mount Kilimanjaro. The reddish dot, that's where I lived. And down here with the major city, is over here, Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam has about 4.5 million people. The population of Tanzania is about 60,000. Many times when we see pictures of Tanzania, we see the plains. They pretty much look like this. Go to a national park, you would be greeted by a ranger, extremely nice. They check papers very thoroughly. Very hot there. We went in a bus and toured the park, and I felt like a sardine in a tin can. It was just so hot, so uncomfortable. Eventually, I dozed off. People would stop and take pictures. So that was good. And the large city, Dar es Salaam, just like any large city, very dense. So again, in that region, there's going to be 4.5 million people living. They have all the modern conveniences that you would want, shopping centers, just not many of them. So there were like 2 major Western-style shopping centers in Dar es Salaam, but there were also a lot of dirt streets in the city. This is kind of more typical of the region I lived. The houses were usually made of clay brick. They were sometimes stuccoed over with cement. The roads were dirt. And if you've ever driven down to Florida, you've driven through Georgia, you see all that red clay. That's what my soil was like. It was all that red clay. Very slippery. When I went there, of course, I was somewhat arrogant, and people told me it's slippery, and I figured I can walk on ice, I can walk on this here slippery clay without a problem. Ice is flat, the mountains are not. Slippery clay. So more than one time I fell, sometimes embarrassing moments. I fell into a mud puddle one time in front of my students. They didn't laugh. They go, "How are you, sir?" You know. And the other time that was kind of bad, I was going down the mountain, and I slid, and I ended up in a farmer's field. So I felt bad about knocking over some of his plants. So this is in mountains near my home, and these were some children, and we can take a look. They're pretty much happy. They loved to have their picture taken. Sometimes you might read in the paper, or magazines, or seen a news report that some movie actress or something, there was an article, and they went to Tanzania, they went to East Africa, and were taking pictures, and they were criticized for that. The kids love it. They love the attention. It was fabulous. Now, the clothes look dirty. They probably only have 2 sets of clothes. You know, like the temperature there is always about the same, between the low 50s and the mid 80s. And the transportation, the major form of transportation was by bus. Now, the bus on the left, that would go between cities, but it typically would not go that far. It would be called a costa. The vans would be typically relegated to doing transportation between villages. And the larger buses, they would go between the major cities. From me to go from my home to Dar es Salaam was about an 8-hour bus trip. The bus stopped one time after about 5 hours. And for emergencies, they would stop, and people would kind of run out into the bushes where there were bushes, you know, and kind of do what they had to do and then come back. But that was not common. Normally we waited and we would go like the 5-hour stop and then go another 3 hours. The buses were cramped. They would play sometimes movies, sometimes not, but nothing special. You could get modern type buses from the big cities that would have air conditioning and bathrooms on them. And for some reason, the Tanzanians, even though it would be like 85 degrees and we're riding in a bus, they would be reluctant to open windows. Just, I don't know why. So one of the things that was fascinating, this is something that I've enjoyed a lot. These were some people waiting for a bus. And this is one of the villages, like on the way between my home and another town, Moshi, where I had several meetings. And the two girls with the turquoise scarves, we were kind of looking at each other, making eye contact, waving and smiling. Makes you feel really good. And their mother there is to their left, and then I snapped their picture. And I was weird. They just didn't see people like me all the time. Unfortunately, that's me, but I wanted to get something like, this was like what the bus stand looked like. They had many things out front that people could buy things, pick up snacks, what they needed. I did not have any pictures of the markets, unfortunately. This is an elementary school that's basically inside of the city. And notice one thing, all the kids are dressed alike. The girls they have the blue skirts and the green sweaters. All the students in Tanzania wear uniforms. So every school has a different match of colors. Very lush environment, green, beautiful. During the rainy season, a bit slippery, but you had to be careful. This was not far from my home, and unfortunately, again, I forgot my pointer, but if you look far enough into the distance, you see the plains. I lived at the edge of the mountain range. So I would climb up to, I'd walk up to the mountain that's behind the school and just relax, just beautiful. All the mountains, right after another, just rolling for miles and miles. And right in the center of that picture is a waterfall. So this was after the rainy season, and it kind of slowed down a bit. But during the rainy season, water was just flushing over. The first year I was there, extremely wet. The rainy season was extremely wet, and the valley by my school was completely flooded. Now, this is something that everybody probably recognizes. You've probably seen hundreds of pictures of this. This is Kilimanjaro. So this is looking at Kilimanjaro from the town called Moshi. It's about an hour drive away. It's the only snow-covered mountain in Africa. It's the highest, about the only snow-covered, but it is the highest mountain in Africa. And this is what Kilimanjaro looks like at the top. So it was probably about 20 degrees that day up there. So it wasn't extremely bitter cold. But again, most of the people there, the Tanzanians, they're accustomed to warmer temperatures. Notice the people walking up the mountain are not carrying anything. They have porters do that. So the porters will carry these things on their head. So they carry all the supplies. Extremely athletic people. It's just incredible what they could do. And, there's one little monkey. So I had some monkeys. Maybe it's not a monkey, but I had those kind of creatures also living by my house. But they would not allow us to get close to them because people would throw stones at them because they got into the gardens and they ate the food. So you could only get pictures of them in the trees, and that was very difficult to see them. The town I lived in, Lushoto, minor tourist area. It was kind of like a secondary tourist area. It was more for people who were traveling on a budget. Not a lot of high expense there, but you could be in the mountains and you could go down to the plains and see every ecosystem in between them. All kinds of different animals. We did not have any large animals like elephants or lions or tigers in my region. Completely safe. I would just go out walking for hours and not really worry about anything. Here's just a picture of a road, and this is the kind of road that basically would be connecting villages, a dirt road. Just right now there's just a truck on it, and buses would be passing on it. Again, during the rainy season, somewhat dangerous. There was, I don't know if you remember, a couple years ago, there was a school bus full of children that went over a cliff. They were being followed by another busload of Lutheran missionaries or people who were helping in the community, and they tried to, like save some of the people, but I think about 30, they had this mass funeral at one of the soccer stadiums. Just extremely tragic, but the roads were like driving on ice where the ice is on a slant. So some Peace Corps volunteers, and this was one of my favorite areas. This was the highest peak in the region, and they're standing on just a rock. You had to climb up this rock about 10 feet, like holding through a crack. It's kind of neat, but again, just represents the mountain range and how green everything is there. Water was a problem. My friends would typically in the region would have to get water from streams. So probably one of the most interesting stories is we would have a 2-bucket system. The top bucket would have the water from the stream. It would go through a ceramic filter into a bottom bucket. So one of my friends was cleaning out his top bucket one day, and it had pollywogs in it. So my water came out of a tap that was about 30 feet from my house, so I was a little bit luckier. So the girl is sitting at the edge of the rock. If she moved a foot closer out to the front of her, she would be dropping about 500 feet. So the young volunteers, they would do things that would make my heart beat. I don't know. So again, this is a somewhat common famous falls in the region, Makuzi Falls. The 3 guys there in front, they're teachers at school, good friends. There was the volunteer, and of course myself there, but the water would just come pouring down. It was probably about 80 foot, and we just got that one part. That was kind of the best picture. This is the other area. Now, where I lived, it was about 4,500 feet, and this was a few hundred feet above that. So this was about 4,600 feet, maybe 5,000 feet. And if she walked 5 steps backward, she'd be falling probably about 3,000 feet. Of course, like on a slant. So the elevation at the plane is 1,200 feet, and that's probably about closer to 5,000 feet. And again, those little lines are the roads. If you come up like closer, sometimes you see little dots. Those are houses. Tiny dots would be buses. So our school was really lucky. Now we finally get more to the people. We had a computer lab was donated by a German non-governmental organization, an NGO, and the students would come in here and study. During the first year, I was only teaching about 16 hours a week. And so I had time to work with the students. We'd come into the lab. Sometimes we actually had classes in the lab. We did things like the Khan Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Wikipedia, many good resources. And we had a network, so those students are connected. I had a couple smartphones. So they're using my Wi-Fi or smartphones to connect to the Wi-Fi, and they are actually doing lessons. A little bit later, we'll actually see a lesson that they were looking at. So I use this slide as talking to my other volunteers at how easy it would be to set up a good study lab. One of my dreams would be to have like a nice electronic library where you have all these books electronically, and you can collect thousands of cell phones, and people can actually be there and have the books. Books are somewhat of a problem, and people say, well, just ship them books, but shipping is expensive. So that's somewhat of a problem. So that's something kind of talking about with some friends about there. Now, here's my shirt. This is the lady who gave me my shirt. She is a cook, just sweet lady, and notice that smile. I don't know, it just melts my heart. And this was the little workroom next to the kitchen where they did the cooking. At my school, we had some residential students who were equivalent to a community college. I essentially taught at a high school. And at the community college level, the students will stay at the school. Typical classroom. Now, the first impression that a lot of people will notice is how dirty the walls are. You can't clean them. I tried. My house looked the same. I tried cleaning the walls, and all I did was take off the paint. The desks typically broken, but the kids really nice. So our chalkboards were chipped, hard to read, again, the very poor community. They did not have a lot of money to maintain things. And the government, again, was poor. Unfortunately, like when you get to, I think in Tanzania, you have people who will be making deals. For example, there was a mining company out of Canada that made deals to take minerals, and they were undervaluing what they were taking. And that was discovered, and they were fined, and that was fixed. But very common that people would be taken advantage of. Smile at some students. This is the house that I lived in. I lived in the left-hand side. It was a duplex. That clothesline is where I hung my clothes. Again, I love the smiles all the time. The students, you would see them pretty happy. Tanzania has a democratic form of government. So this is the students were gathered for an assembly to vote for the school government. And the teachers are passing out the ballots. And you can see my school, the colors were blue and red for the girls, tan and blue for the boys. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of my neighbors. School uniforms start at an early age, preschool. This is her first day of preschool. And she's got her uniform. She's all ready to go. Just like us, and they look different, they dress different, they speak different, but they celebrate like we do. Here's her birthday party. And this is like a Muslim family, the nicest family I think you could ever meet. They just made me feel like a king when I went into their house. It's so embarrassing to always get fed first, always to get extra helpings. One day I was at a house eating, and one day I told the lady, boy, this is really good. I really like it. And I did, and I was just complimenting her. And before I knew it, she was taking everything that was left and putting it on my plate, thinking, oh, you want more? I was so full. And you had to eat it, but it was delicious. But just super fabulous people. It's a lot of plant variety. Soccer field, kind of barren. The hospital. So now back again to a little bit more with the people. Notice this is, again, a celebration. This is preschool graduation. So we have our kindergarten graduation, same kind of idea. The lady on the left, she's Happiness. Her name is Happiness. And she's wearing Western-style clothes. Very common. The lady to her left is a Muslim. She's dressed very traditionally. And the two ladies on the right are kind of mixed. They could probably fit in anywhere. Not much different. And notice they've got the graduation cap. Here I've got a little bit better. It's kind of like dark and not a good picture. I'm not a photographer. But anyway, got their graduation caps just like we would. There's really so little difference. It's just surprising. So when we talk about that connection, you see the similarities, far more similarities than differences. Again, some elementary students with their dress. Notice they all have different kinds of shoes. And what happens is that the people will buy their clothes, and we call it pile shopping. Clothes, when you donate like to Goodwill or some other organizations, they will be sending clothes to other countries, third world countries. And they'll just be in a pile. So you have a big pile of children's clothes or a big pile of adult clothes. And that's where people would do the shopping. This was at our school. We did a fashion show, and the students, these are all students of mine, they would dress representing different regions of the country. And they just loved dress up. They loved acting. This would be dressed more like the Maasai, like he'd be wearing kind of like this here kind of cloth that's typical. This would probably be, my guess, more of Zanzibar. People who had their own gardens. Again, one of the traditions, like they had their birthday parties, the guest or the person of honor, their obligation was to give everybody a piece of cake. So when you went to a party, whoever was there, they'd cut up the cake and they'd give everybody a piece, and you ate it. The ladies had their games, like this was the game netball. And notice again, playing sports, again, they still maintain the dress. So we have, in my region was more liberal because it was more touristic, more tourism in the area. And some of the villages, the girls, the female Peace Corps volunteers couldn't wear like pants. And the soccer field again, kind of go through. We had morning assembly we did announcements. Everything was served in plastic buckets, cooking the buckets, basketball practice. The teachers, picture of the teachers at that time at the school, everybody there. And the students again, the parade area. So this is the library. It's very common that they would start construction of something and run out of money. Even houses were that way. People would take maybe 3 or 4 years. They would have some money. They would start building the house. It might sit for 6 months until they get more money and then continue with it. So yeah, I told you here, so that smartphone is connected to the Wi-Fi and they could be doing a lesson right there. So they could be watching, reading, anything. They could be reading a book. It doesn't matter. Studying together. Again, inside of a classroom. This was a national exam day. So all the boys take the test in one room. The girls take the test in another room. They're not together during the national. This is a Monday exam day where they take it. Every Monday they had an exam over some subject. Prayed. The headmaster, kind of going through now, kind of going way over. This is one of my favorite photos here. This girl, she wanted to learn so badly, but boy, she had 2 strikes against her. In the good year when I was there, we had 3 math teachers for 700 students. In the bad year, we had 2 math teachers for 700 students. So very difficult to help the students, to give them the individual needs. There just was not enough time. So as I mentioned, the first year I was doing 16 hours a week. The second year I was doing 30 hours a week. So there's just not a lot of extra time to help those. And she really wanted to learn, and she really tried, but it just everything was stacked against her. So she's kind of like in that dark room, looking outside, and that wall's the barrier. Just kind of, again, happy. Okay, I'll speed up real quickly because we're going way over. I love that smile, just fabulous bus trip. We went to Amboni Caves one time, and we'll see the caves. Those were the students. So I was starting to wander around the caves, and they were pretty dark inside a little bit. Some students come and grab my hand right away. No, sir, don't go there. So they were really worried about me. I was so overprotected. Or I think they felt that maybe I was incompetent. I don't know. Probably that also. On the way back, we stopped to see the Indian Ocean. And of course, like when you put kids from the mountain by water, what do? They jump in. So some of the kids brought swimming suits, but some of the kids didn't. So that's the Indian Ocean. And this is what the students would look like when they're going to their prayer service. There, and that's it. And again, I apologize for running over. And thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here. If you have any questions about the Peace Corps, I would be glad to answer them. In my group, the oldest person was 79. I think the youngest person was just out of college, probably about 22. 10% of my group, which was 50 people, 10% of them were over 60. So, like the Peace Corps is open to having experienced people. And it was a very, very good experience. Thank you very much.